The auditorium fell silent as Amara stood confidently at the podium, fluently translating the ancient text Professor Sullivan had just declared impossible for an uneducated child. His face drained of color when she switched to explaining the historical context in perfect Latin. His prestigious career was about to collapse spectacularly. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you love seeing arrogant people get what they deserve, and subscribe to catch more stories of hidden genius and sweet justice. Now let's rewind to discover how a young black girl with an extraordinary gift found herself in position to bring down one of the most acclaimed linguists in the world. 14-year-old Amara Jenkins possessed an extraordinary gift that remained hidden from the world. She spoke 6 languages fluently, could read several more, and had an uncanny ability to recognize patterns in ancient texts that even seasoned scholars missed. Yet no one except her mother knew about these remarkable talents. Amara deliberately concealed her abilities, having learned early that being both brilliant and black often attracted the wrong kind of attention in a world that preferred to underestimate her. Her mother, Olivia Jenkins, worked as a custodian at the prestigious Welton University in Boston, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans in the same hallowed halls where the country's elite pursued higher education. Though the job paid poorly and demanded backbreaking labor, Olivia took pride in providing for her daughter as a single mother. Summer break had arrived, and with childcare unaffordable, 14-year-old Amara accompanied her mother to work daily. While Olivia cleaned the academic buildings, Amara found secret ways to educate herself. She developed an elaborate system of self-education, borrowing books from unattended library carts, listening outside partially open classroom doors during summer sessions, and utilizing free online resources whenever possible. The university seemed to have an unwritten rule about people like Olivia and Amara. Security guards regularly stopped them, demanding identification and questioning their presence with suspicion in their eyes. Professors who passed them in hallways looked through them as if they were invisible conversations continuing without pause or acknowledgement. The linguistics department held a special fascination for Amara. She often lingered near its central display case, featuring portraits of famous scholars throughout history, all white men with stern expressions looking out from ornate frames. Their contributions to understanding human language received detailed descriptions on polished plaques, while Amara wondered if anyone who looked like her had ever been allowed to make similar discoveries. One evening, while organizing their small apartment, Amara discovered her mother kept a weathered shoebox filled with family documents. Among birth certificates and old photographs, she noticed peculiar papers containing references to someone called Dr. Thompson, described as a scholar of ancient languages. When Amara asked about these documents, her mother quickly tucked them away, saying only that some family histories were too painful to revisit. Professor Eleanor Reed, a middle-aged linguistics professor with kind eyes and a reputation for mentoring, promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds, noticed Amara one afternoon. The girl sat cross-legged in an empty classroom, completely absorbed in an advanced text on Proto-Indo-European language structures. Professor Reed observed silently from the doorway, impressed by the teenager's intense concentration, but decided against approaching immediately, not wanting to startle or embarrass her. That evening, while helping her mother clean the administrative offices, Amara overheard excited conversations about the upcoming International Ancient Languages Symposium. The event would feature renowned linguist Professor Thompson Sullivan, whose groundbreaking work on extinct Mediterranean languages had earned him academic stardom. Faculty members spoke of him with reverence, usually reserved for celebrities, mentioning his numerous awards, best-selling books, and television appearances. Little did Amara know that this prestigious visitor would soon change the course of her life forever. Professor Thompson Sullivan arrived at Welton University with the pomp and circumstance typically reserved for visiting dignitaries or rock stars. At 58, he cut an imposing figure with his tailored suits, perfectly trimmed silver beard, and the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding attention. Students and faculty lined the pathways as his black town car pulled up to the main administration building, eager for a glimpse of the academic superstar whose name dominated linguistics journals worldwide. His reputation preceded him. Sullivan had single-handedly revolutionized the understanding of ancient Mediterranean languages, particularly his groundbreaking work deciphering previously untranslatable Etrurian texts. 3 best-selling books, countless academic articles, and a popular documentary series had cemented his status as the preeminent authority in his field. What his adoring public failed to notice, however, was how differently Sullivan behaved when the cameras stopped rolling and the applause faded. From the moment he stepped on campus, Sullivan displayed a dismissive, often contemptuous attitude toward service staff, particularly people of color. He snapped his fingers to summon assistance, interrupted people mid-sentence, and referred to maintenance workers as the help rather than bothering to learn their names. When a young black security guard asked to see his identification badge as per university protocol, Sullivan responded with such indignation that the flustered administrator accompanying him apologized profusely for the inappropriate inconvenience while glaring at the guard. The linguistics department had allocated Sullivan the largest office on the top floor, with sweeping views of the campus and the city beyond. Olivia Jenkins received specific instructions to clean this space each evening after Sullivan departed with strict orders to touch nothing on his desk or disturb his elaborate organizational system. Department Chair Dr. Wallace personally directed her to use unscented cleaning products and to work quickly, efficiently, and, most importantly, invisibly. Sullivan's work focused on ancient Etrurian, a notoriously difficult dead language with few surviving texts. Previously, scholars considered much of the existing corpus indecipherable, but Sullivan claimed to have developed a revolutionary translation method that unlocked their meanings. His upcoming keynote would reveal additional breakthroughs that promised to transform the field. Amara, whose fascination with languages drew her to linguistics texts like a magnet, could hardly contain her excitement at the prospect of glimpsing the great professor's work. One evening, while her mother cleaned the adjacent bathroom, Amara slipped into Sullivan's office drawn by papers scattered across his massive desk. She stood respectfully at the edge eyes, scanning the complex symbols and annotations that covered the pages. Her heart raced as she recognized certain patterns, her mind automatically beginning to process the structures. So absorbed was she in the ancient text that she failed to hear the door open behind her. Sullivan's voice cut through the room like ice. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, crossing the room in 4 quick strides. Amara stepped back, stammering an apology, explaining she had merely been looking. Sullivan's face contorted with anger as he roughly gathered his papers, checking them as if for contamination. Looking, or stealing. "These are priceless academic materials, not picture books for the cleaning lady's brat." 2 colleagues who had accompanied Sullivan to the office exchanged uncomfortable glances, but remained silent as Sullivan continued his tirade. "Security in this place is absolutely unacceptable. I specifically requested that my workspace remain undisturbed by unauthorized personnel." He gestured dismissively toward Amara. "This is precisely why these institutions need to maintain proper standards. In my day, service workers knew their place and certainly didn't allow their children to rummage through scholarly materials they couldn't possibly understand." From the hallway, Professor Reed witnessed the interaction, her expression darkening as Sullivan made pointed comments about affirmative action priorities, undermining academic excellence, and how some people should focus on practical, vocational training rather than aspiring beyond their natural capabilities. After Sullivan dismissed Amara with a warning to stick to what people like you are good at, he turned to his colleagues and loudly proclaimed that he remained the only living person who truly understood the nuances of Etrurian linguistic structure. 20 years of dedicated scholarship cannot be replaced by untrained curiosity, no matter how well-intentioned, he declared, with a self-satisfied smile. What Sullivan couldn't know was that Amara had recognized several symbols from the mysterious family documents her mother kept hidden away. As humiliation burned her cheeks and tears threatened to spill, determination crystallized in her mind. She would learn more about these symbols despite Sullivan's cruelty, despite his dismissal of her capabilities, despite everything. That night, Olivia noticed her daughter's unusual quietness and the lingering hurt in her eyes. When Amara reluctantly shared what had happened, Olivia's expression hardened. "Stay away from him, Amara," she warned, her voice uncharacteristically stern. "Men like that don't just insult you. They can destroy your future with a single word to the right person. We can't afford to lose this job." What Olivia didn't say, what remained unspoken between them, was that the documents Amara had glimpsed contained secrets that connected directly to Sullivan's celebrated work in ways neither of them yet fully understood. After days of gentle persistence, Amara finally convinced her mother to show her the mysterious family documents she had glimpsed in the old shoebox. "You deserve to know," Olivia finally conceded one evening, pulling the box from beneath her bed. "I was waiting until you were older, but perhaps now is the right time." As Olivia carefully laid out yellowed papers, faded photographs, and leather-bound journals on their small kitchen table, Amara felt a shiver of anticipation. The first revelation struck like lightning. Her great-grandfather was Dr. James Thompson, a brilliant linguist who had specialized in ancient Mediterranean languages, particularly Etrurian. Photographs showed a dignified black man with intelligent eyes and a serious expression standing before bookshelves or bent over manuscripts. "But this can't be," Amara whispered, recognizing the name from her reading. "Dr. Thompson isn't in any of the modern linguistics textbooks." Olivia's laugh held no humor. "Of course he isn't. They erased him just like they've erased so many of our people's contributions." She carefully unfolded a newspaper clipping from 1954 that briefly mentioned Dr. Thompson's work at a historically black college, noting his unusual theories about Etrurian language patterns. "Your great-grandfather made extraordinary breakthroughs. In translating Etrurian texts," Olivia explained, her voice carrying both pride and bitterness. "He developed a method based on comparative analysis of Mediterranean trade languages that allowed him to decipher passages everyone else considered impossible. He was preparing a major publication when he died suddenly of a heart attack at 52. She paused, swallowing hard. Within 6 months, his white colleagues had claimed his discoveries as their own. They had access to his notes, you see. They published papers using his methods without a single acknowledgement, and the academic world celebrated them as visionaries. The central piece of their collection was Dr. Thompson's personal journal filled with detailed notes on Etrurian translations, complete with methodology explanations and comparative tables. Amara ran her fingers gently over her great-grandfather's handwriting, feeling a connection across generations. "There's something else you should know," Olivia said quietly. "I studied linguistics in college. I was following in his footsteps, determined to restore his legacy somehow." She smiled sadly. "Then I became pregnant with you. Your father left scholarship, money dried up, and survival became more important than academic justice. I dropped out in my 3rd year." Amara stared at her mother, seeing her in an entirely new light. The woman who scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets had once walked the same academic paths as the professors who now looked through her. "Why did you never tell me?" Amara asked. "Because knowing how the world works can break your spirit," Olivia replied simply. "I wanted you to believe anything was possible, before you learned how the deck is stacked against us. Our family's academic legacy was buried by generations of discrimination. Your great-grandfather published under pseudonyms just to get his early work considered. He was denied positions at major universities despite his qualifications. Even when his brilliance couldn't be denied, he received a fraction of the support and recognition given to his white counterparts." As Amara carefully examined Dr. Thompson's notes and compared them to what she remembered of Sullivan's papers, she felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. Mom, Professor Sullivan's celebrated translation method looks exactly like great-grandfather's approach. The structural analysis, the comparative technique, even some of the specific linguistic markers, they're all here in these notes. Olivia nodded grimly. "I suspected as much when I first heard him speak on television years ago. But what could I do? A college dropout custodian accusing a world-famous scholar of plagiarism, I'd lose my job and be blacklisted from every university in the country. With new purpose, Amara intensified her secret studies, comparing Sullivan's published articles, which she accessed through the university library's public terminals, with her great-grandfather's detailed notes. She created careful comparisons documenting striking similarities and identical conclusions separated by decades. Professor Reed, who had witnessed Sullivan's cruel dismissal of Amara, began noticing the girl's focused research, but misinterpreted it as general linguistic interest. She discreetly helped Amara access research materials, impressed by the teenager's dedication, but unaware of her true motivation. "You have quite an aptitude for this subject," Professor Reed commented one afternoon, finding Amara absorbed in an article about ancient trade languages. "Have you considered pursuing it formally when you're older?" Amara offered a non-committal smile, not ready to share her discoveries or intentions. As she delved deeper into her great-grandfather's methodology, Amara made a stunning discovery. Sullivan's translations contained several critical errors that Dr. Thompson's approach would have avoided. Places where Sullivan had forced interpretations to fit his preconceived notions, Dr. Portibas's, are 8. Thompson had identified alternative meanings that created more coherent texts. These discrepancies proved that Sullivan hadn't fully understood the stolen methodology he claimed as his own. Do you believe Amara should confront Professor Sullivan immediately with the evidence that he stole her great-grandfather's work? Comment number 1 if you think she should expose him right away, or number 2 if you think she needs to gather more evidence first. Hit that like button if you're shocked by how her family's academic legacy was stolen, and subscribe to see how Amara will reclaim her great-grandfather's rightful place in linguistic history. What do you think will happen when Sullivan discovers Amara knows his secret? Will he try to silence her, or will he face the consequences of his academic theft? Let's continue to find out how this brilliant young woman turns the tables on someone who believed he could erase her family's contributions. The morning of the International Ancient Languages Symposium dawned bright and clear sunlight, streaming through the windows of Welton University's grand auditorium as staff made final preparations for the prestigious event. Olivia Jenkins had been assigned extra hours to ensure everything sparkled for the distinguished visitors, and with her regular childcare provider unavailable, Amara accompanied her mother to work once again. "Stay in the back," Olivia instructed her daughter as they entered the gleaming building. "Keep your head down and your voice low. I can't afford any problems today." The symposium had attracted linguistic scholars from around the world, their excited conversations in multiple languages, creating a buzz of intellectual energy throughout the campus. Distinguished professors from Oxford, Harvard, Sorbonne, and dozens of other prestigious institutions arrived in waves, greeted by eager graduate students and fawning administrators. At the center of this academic storm stood Professor Sullivan, holding court near the registration desk, basking in admiration from his peers. The carefully orchestrated atmosphere of scholarly celebration suffered its first disruption at precisely 8:42 a.m., when Sullivan's assistant, a harried graduate student named Thomas, abruptly resigned. "I cannot and will not continue to work under these conditions," he announced loudly enough for nearby attendees to hear. "Your behavior is inexcusable, your demands unreasonable, and your treatment of people beneath contempt." Sullivan's face flushed with anger as Thomas dropped his conference badge on the registration table and walked out. "Ungrateful, incompetent fool," Sullivan muttered loud enough for those nearby to hear. "These millennials have no respect for hierarchy or proper academic decorum." His dismissive comments did nothing to solve the immediate problem. Sullivan now had no one to organize his presentation materials, manage his schedule, or handle the countless details his keynote address required. Chaos ensued as conference organizers frantically searched for a replacement. Dr. Wallace, the department chair, personally called every graduate student in the linguistics program, but none were available on such short notice. Sullivan's reputation for difficult behavior had spread widely among the student body. As administrators scurried about trying to resolve the crisis, Sullivan retreated to a private room to review his presentation. Less than an hour before his scheduled keynote, disaster struck again. While gesturing dramatically to emphasize a point to Dr. Wallace, Sullivan knocked over a full cup of coffee, sending the dark liquid cascading across his meticulously organized presentation materials. His roar of frustration echoed down the hallway. "Get someone in here to clean this mess immediately. Doctor?" Wallace rushed to comply, returning moments later with Olivia, who quickly began sopping up the spilled coffee with towels. Sullivan paced the room, lambasting the university's incompetence and substandard facilities, while Olivia worked silently. Amara had slipped in behind her mother, standing quietly in a corner, hoping to remain unnoticed. "This is precisely what I mean." Sullivan continued gesturing toward Olivia. "Even the most basic tasks require constant supervision. At Princeton, this would never happen. At Cambridge, they understand proper respect for scholarly work." His voice dripped with condescension. "I suppose this is what happens when universities prioritize diversity quotas over excellence." Olivia kept her eyes down, her hands steady as she cleaned, but Amara saw the slight tightening of her mother's jaw, the only visible sign of the dignity she maintained in the face of such disrespect. When Sullivan stepped out to take an urgent call from his publisher, Olivia continued cleaning while Amara helped gather the scattered papers. The girl immediately recognized the ancient Etrurian texts from her research and began organizing them according to the chronological order indicated by the linguistic markers she had studied in her great-grandfather's notes. Professor Reed, who had entered the room to offer assistance, watched in quiet amazement as Amara confidently sorted the complex materials. "You seem to understand what you're looking at," Reed commented softly, approaching Amara while Olivia wiped coffee from the table in the corner. Amara froze, uncertain whether to acknowledge her comprehension or pretend ignorance. Before she could decide, Dr. Wallace returned surveying the disaster zone with growing panic. Sullivan's keynote would begin in 30 minutes, and his presentation remained in disarray. "We need someone to help organize these materials immediately, Doctor." Wallace fretted. "The symposium's success depends on this keynote." Professor Reed glanced thoughtfully at Amara. "What about her?" she suggested, nodding toward the teenager. "She seems quite capable and appears to understand the organizational system." Dr. Wallace looked skeptical. "The custodian's daughter Sullivan would never accept." "Do we have any other options?" Reed interrupted. "Every graduate student is already assigned to other speakers or managing registration. We're out of time and alternatives. Desperation won over doubt." "Fine," Dr. Wallace conceded. "If she can help get these materials in order quickly, we'll try it." When Sullivan returned minutes later, he stopped short at the sight of Amara, carefully arranging his papers. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, looking from Dr. Wallace to Professor Reed. "Why is this child touching my research?" "Professor Sullivan, Doctor," Wallace began placatingly. "We've had an emergency situation. Your assistant has left, and we need immediate help organizing your presentation after the coffee incident. This young lady has already begun sorting your materials in what appears to be the correct order." Sullivan stared incredulously at Amara, recognition dawning. "This is the maid's daughter who was snooping in my office," he exclaimed. "Absolutely not. I will not have unqualified hands on my life's work." Professor Reed stepped forward. "With all due respect, Professor Sullivan, you're scheduled to speak in 22 minutes. Your materials need immediate organization, and everyone else is occupied with symposium duties. We have no other options available." Sullivan's eyes darted from his scattered papers to the clock calculation, replacing outrage as he realized his predicament. His reputation would suffer far more from a disorganized, delayed keynote than from accepting temporary assistance, however undesirable he found the source. "Fine," he conceded with ill grace. "She may sort the papers, but nothing more. And she will follow my exact instructions." He turned to Amara with a dismissive gesture. "You girl, you will organize these by the labeled tabs only. Do not read the content. Do not attempt to understand what is clearly beyond your comprehension. Simply place them in numerical order." Amara nodded silently, continuing her work while appearing to follow his instructions. In reality, she absorbed every detail, confirming her suspicions about the striking similarities between Sullivan's groundbreaking translation method and her great-grandfather's approach. More importantly, she noticed a critical error in Sullivan's translation of a key Etrurian phrase, one that would completely undermine his central argument about trade relationships in the ancient Mediterranean. Sullivan, oblivious to Amara's understanding, assigned her increasingly menial tasks as she completed each one with quiet efficiency. "At least you can follow basic instructions," he muttered, grudgingly impressed despite himself. "Perhaps there's hope for your future, as a secretary or assistant somewhere." Olivia, who had finished cleaning and was preparing to leave, caught her daughter's eye with a warning look that clearly said, "Don't engage, don't challenge, don't reveal what you know." Amara gave an almost imperceptible nod. The time wasn't right, not yet. But as she arranged Sullivan's final presentation slides, a plan began forming in her mind. The prestigious professor had unwittingly given his greatest academic threat direct access to his most important work, all while believing her incapable of understanding it. His arrogance and prejudice had blinded him to the possibility that the young black girl he so casually dismissed might be the instrument of his undoing. The grand auditorium of Welton University filled to capacity for Professor Sullivan's keynote address. Distinguished scholars occupied the front rows, graduate students and faculty claimed the middle section, while interested undergraduates and visitors found space toward the back. Olivia and Amara stood against the rear wall, Olivia having received special permission to attend since she had helped prepare the presentation materials. "Remember what I told you," Olivia whispered to her daughter. "We're here to observe only. This isn't our world." But Amara could hardly contain the knowledge bubbling inside her as Sullivan took the stage to enthusiastic applause. The massive screen behind him displayed the title of his presentation, "Revolutionary Approaches to Etrurian Translation, Breaking the Ancient Code." Sullivan began with practiced confidence, his rich baritone filling the space as he recounted the historical challenges of Etrurian translation. "For centuries, this language remained largely impenetrable," he explained, clicking through slides showing ancient inscriptions and tablets. Previous scholars managed only fragmentary translations, missing the fundamental structural patterns that connect this language to other Mediterranean trade dialects. Amara listened intently, recognizing whole passages that mirrored her great-grandfather's journal entries, almost word for word. Sullivan continued detailing his innovative methodology that allowed for comprehensive translation of previously indecipherable texts. He demonstrated his approach using several examples, explaining how his breakthrough had revolutionized understanding of ancient Mediterranean commerce and cultural exchange. This required years of painstaking comparative analysis. Sullivan emphasized casting himself as the lone genius who had seen patterns where others saw only mystery. Working entirely independently, I developed this systematic approach through rigorous application of linguistic principles that had never before been applied to Etrurian. The deception was breathtaking in its boldness. Amara felt her hands trembling with indignation as Sullivan claimed credit for work her great-grandfather had completed decades earlier. When Sullivan reached a particularly complex passage about maritime trade routes, his confidence faltered slightly. The Etrurian text contained several ambiguous phrases that had clearly given him difficulty. "This section," he said, pausing to clear his throat, "presents unique challenges due to regional dialect variations. The conventional translation would suggest northern trade routes, but my method reveals an eastern orientation instead." Amara immediately recognized the mistranslation. Dr. Thompson's notes had specifically addressed this passage, explaining how the reference to eastern seas actually indicated southeastern travel patterns, not due east, as Sullivan had concluded. The mistake revealed Sullivan's incomplete understanding of the methodology he had stolen. The Eastern interpretation aligns with archaeological evidence. Sullivan continued his voice, regaining confidence as he built his argument on the flawed translation. Amara couldn't stop herself from whispering the correct translation under her breath, the Etrurian words flowing naturally from her lips. Professor Takahashi Hirano, a respected Japanese linguist, seated near the back row, turned slightly at the sound of her voice. With a quizzical expression, he studied Amara briefly before returning his attention to Sullivan's presentation. As Sullivan proceeded to the next section, Professor Hirano raised his hand. "Professor Sullivan," he began politely when acknowledged, I'm curious about your interpretation of the passage regarding Eastern trade routes. The syntactic structure seems to suggest a southeastern direction rather than due east, particularly given the seasonal reference in the preceding sentence. Sullivan's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. An interesting observation, Professor Hirano, but I assure you my translation is correct. Perhaps the acoustics in this hall are affecting your ability to hear my explanation clearly. He gestured vaguely toward the technical staff. The audio system seems substandard. Continuing without further acknowledgement of the question, Sullivan projected another Etrurian text onto the screen. As he began explaining his interpretation, a low murmur of conversation from the back of the room caught his attention. Olivia was whispering urgently to Amara, trying to quiet her daughter's increasingly agitated reactions to Sullivan's misrepresentations. Sullivan paused mid-sentence, his annoyance evident. I find it difficult to present complex linguistic concepts with these constant distractions, he announced to the audience. His gaze fixed on Olivia and Amara. If the custodial staff and their families cannot maintain appropriate decorum during an academic presentation, perhaps they should excuse themselves. The audience shifted uncomfortably at this naked display of elitism. Professor Reed, seated near the front, stood up immediately. Professor Sullivan, she said, firmly, all attendees have been invited to this public lecture. Everyone present has the right to observe the proceedings. Sullivan's face flushed with barely contained anger at being challenged. Attempting to reassert control over the situation and his increasingly restless audience, he made a fatal miscalculation. Well, he said, with exaggerated patience, since we seem to be encouraging universal participation regardless of qualification, perhaps the cleaning lady's daughter would like to attempt a translation herself. After all, why should years of the specialized education and research experience be considered prerequisites for scholarly contribution? An uncomfortable ripple of nervous laughter moved through the audience. Sullivan gestured dramatically toward Amara. Please, young lady, enlighten us with your wisdom on Etrurian linguistic structures. The mockery in his voice was unmistakable. Professor Reed started to object to this obvious attempt at public humiliation, but before she could speak, Amara stepped forward from her position against the wall. A sudden hush fell over the auditorium. Olivia reached for her daughter's arm, whispering, "Amara, don't." But Amara gently removed her mother's hand. "It's time, Mom," she said quietly. "Great-grandfather deserves this." Sullivan watched with smug amusement as Amara walked slowly down the center aisle. Professor Reed moved to meet her halfway, concern evident in her expression. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "His behavior is inappropriate and unprofessional." Amara smiled reassuringly. "I know, but I want to." She continued toward the stage, where Sullivan waited, his expression a mixture of condescension and impatience. "Since you seem so eager to participate," he said loudly enough for the entire audience to hear, "let's see what you make of this." He clicked to a slide displaying an untranslated Etrurian text fragment. This particular passage has stumped scholars for decades. Let's see what wisdom our young friend brings to this challenge. The audience watched in awkward silence as Amara studied the projected text. Some attendees looked embarrassed by the obvious setup for humiliation, while others leaned forward, curiously wondering how the scenario would play out. Sullivan crossed his arms, a satisfied smile playing at his lips, as he prepared to reclaim control of his presentation once the girl inevitably failed. What he couldn't know was that the text he had chosen, an obscure fragment from a maritime trading record, was one that Dr. Thompson had translated in full with detailed notes, explaining each symbolic relationship and grammatical structure. Amara had studied this exact passage just days earlier. As the silence stretched and tension built throughout the auditorium, Amara took a deep breath and prepared to speak. Amara gazed at the Etrurian text projected on the massive screen, instantly recognizing the passage from her great-grandfather's detailed notes. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained clear. Years of self-directed study and nights poring over Dr. Thompson's journals, culminating in this unexpected moment. "This fragment," she began, her voice initially soft but growing stronger with each word, comes from a 3rd century BCE trading manifest found near modern-day Tarquinia. The precise historical context immediately captured the attention of several scholars in the front row who exchanged surprised glances. Sullivan's smirk froze on his face as Amara continued. It documents a specialized trade agreement between Etrurian merchants and North African suppliers, specifically addressing the exchange of purple dye extracted from murex shells. She then began translating, her pronunciation of the ancient language flowing with natural confidence. "We, the Council of 12, establish terms with the seafarers of western shores that 20 vessels of purple dye shall be exchanged for 16 crates of worked silver before the winter solstice. Agreements witnessed under the auspices of the temple guardian and sealed by merchant priest Velther." Sullivan's confident expression faltered, as Amara correctly identified grammatical structures unique to late-period Etrurian commercial documents. He quickly regained his composure, interrupting her with a dismissive wave. "You've obviously memorized this particular translation beforehand," he accused. "Perhaps Professor Reed provided you with materials in some misguided attempt at inclusivity." Professor Reed stood immediately. "I did no such thing," she stated firmly. "And if you're suggesting this young woman has memorized a translation, that would be simple to disprove." She turned to the technical staff. "Could we display a different Etrurian text, one selected at random from the conference materials?" The technician looked to Dr. Wallace, who nodded permission after a moment's hesitation. Sullivan watched with growing discomfort as a new fragment appeared on screen, this one from an Etrurian religious text. "Please continue, Professor Reed," encouraged Amara. The teenager studied the text briefly before translating with the same steady confidence, correctly identifying specialized terminologies related to Etrurian religious practices. Murmurs spread through the audience as linguistics scholars recognized the accuracy of her work. Sullivan's face reddened. Another coincidence, he insisted, though his voice had lost its authoritative resonance. Perhaps she has unusual memorization abilities, but no actual understanding of linguistic methodology. He turned to the technician. "Display the Vetulonia inscription fragment." No one has produced a complete translation of that text. A complicated stone inscription appeared on screen, containing weathered symbols and apparent dialectical variations. Without hesitation, Amara began translating, simultaneously explaining nuances of regional Etrurian dialects and the historical context that informed proper interpretation. Note: the northern inflection in the verb forms, she added, indicating this was likely created by an artisan from the Alpine regions working in the coastal city. Professor Hirano nodded vigorously, clearly impressed, while other scholars began whispering excitedly to each other. Sullivan stalked across the stage, visibly agitated. "This is absurd. Some kind of trick or coaching must be involved." "What's your background in ancient languages?" he demanded, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Where did you study Etrurian under?" whom Amara answered calmly. "I'm self-taught in many respects, but my primary methodology comes from studying the work of Dr. James Thompson." The name hung in the air for a moment before Amara continued. "Dr. Thompson developed a comprehensive approach to Etrurian translation through comparative analysis of Mediterranean trade languages in the early 1950s, though his work was never properly credited in mainstream academic circles." Sullivan visibly paled, recognition flashing across his features before he masked it with indignation. "Thompson. That name means nothing in serious linguistic scholarship. No significant contributions to Etrurian studies came from anyone by that name." "Perhaps not in the publications you've read," Amara replied evenly, "but Dr. Thompson's method forms the foundation for the approach you've presented today as your own original work." Gasps and murmurs erupted throughout the auditorium. "This is outrageous," Sullivan sputtered. "How dare you make such accusations? Who exactly are you to challenge my academic integrity?" Amara straightened her shoulders. "I'm Amara Jenkins, great-granddaughter of Dr. James Thompson, who developed this translation methodology decades before you claimed it as your own innovation." The audience erupted in shocked conversations as Sullivan attempted to dismiss her claim. "Preposterous. The girl is delusional. This is clearly some kind of activist stunt meant to discredit legitimate scholarship, Professor Hirano stood. I suggest we focus on the translations themselves, which the young woman has performed flawlessly. Her methodology appears sound, regardless of its origin. Sullivan jabbed a finger toward Amara. Her facility with these texts proves nothing about their provenance or methodology. This is an orchestrated attempt to undermine my reputation. Dr. Wallace attempted to regain control of the increasingly chaotic situation. Perhaps we should take a brief recess too. No, interrupted Amara firmly. Professor Sullivan has built his career claiming my great-grandfather's work as his own. The academic community deserves to know the truth today. She turned to face the audience directly. Dr. James Thompson was a brilliant black linguist who developed this translation methodology while teaching at Thompson Institute. After his sudden death in 1954, his breakthrough approach mysteriously appeared in publications by white scholars who had access to his notes with no acknowledgement of the true source. As Sullivan sputtered denials, Professor Reed approached the stage. I believe we should give Miss Jenkins the opportunity to substantiate these significant claims. Academic integrity demands we investigate such serious allegations thoroughly. Sullivan attempted to end the session abruptly, citing time constraints and the need for proper channels for such discussions. But Dr. Wallace overruled him, intrigued by the unexpected development and conscious of the room full of distinguished witnesses. I think we should continue, the department chair announced. This symposium exists to advance our understanding of ancient languages through open scholarly exchange. Miss Jenkins, do you have evidence to support your claims? Amara nodded confidently. Yes, I do. Have you ever witnessed someone's carefully constructed facade crumble when their deception was exposed? Comment number 1, if you've seen someone caught in a lie, or number 2, if you believe most people eventually face consequences for their dishonesty. Hit that like button if you're amazed by Amara's courage in challenging such a powerful figure, and subscribe to see how she proves her great-grandfather's legacy was stolen. What evidence do you think Amara has gathered? Will it be enough to convince the skeptical academics, or will Sullivan find a way to discredit her? Let's continue this incredible story of long-overdue justice. Sullivan's attempt to abruptly conclude the session failed, as attendees remained riveted to the unfolding drama. I have a tight schedule of additional presentations, he insisted, gathering his materials with shaking hands. This disruptive episode has already consumed valuable academic discussion time. Dr. Wallace stepped forward, her administrative authority evident in her firm tone. Professor Sullivan, as host of this symposium, I believe this unexpected development warrants further exploration. The serious nature of these claims, and the extraordinary linguistic abilities Mrs. Jenkins has demonstrated justify extending this session. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience, with several prominent scholars nodding their approval. Sullivan glanced desperately around the room, finding no allies among the assembled academics, whose expressions ranged from curiosity to suspicion. Fine, he conceded bitterly. Let the girl present whatever fabricated evidence she believes she has, though this entire spectacle makes a mockery of serious scholarship. Amara maintained her composure despite Sullivan's dismissive tone. Professor Reed, she said, turning to the woman who had quietly supported her studies, would you be willing to assist me? Professor Reed immediately joined her near the podium. What do you need? She asked. The materials I showed you yesterday, Amara explained quietly. The copies we made of my great-grandfather's notes. Understanding dawned in Reed's eyes. The materials she had helped Amara photocopy, believing them to be general research interest, suddenly took on profound significance. Of course, she replied quickly, retrieving a folder from her conference bag and distributing copies to key figures in the audience, including Dr. Wallace and Professor Hirano. Amara moved to the computer connected to the main projection system. With your permission, she said to the technician, who glanced at Dr. Wallace and received a nod of approval before stepping aside. Amara displayed a scan of her great-grandfather's handwritten notes side by side with excerpts from Sullivan's published work. Dr. James Thompson developed his Etrurian translation methodology between 1946 and 1954, she explained. These are his original notes detailing the comparative approach to Mediterranean trade languages that formed the foundation of his breakthrough. She systematically highlighted specific techniques, theoretical frameworks, and analytical structures that appeared in both documents, demonstrating striking similarities impossible to attribute to coincidence. The syntactic pattern recognition system that Professor Sullivan presented earlier as his original innovation appears in my great-grandfather's work from 1949, described in nearly identical terms. Sullivan's face contorted with fury. This proves nothing. Similar approaches can develop independently. Convergent scholarly evolution is well documented in academic research. Anyone could fabricate backdated notes to create the appearance of precedence. He turned to the audience, appealing to their academic skepticism. There's no verification these documents even date from the period claimed. This could easily be an elaborate hoax. Before Amara could respond, the auditorium doors opened, and Olivia Jenkins walked purposefully down the central aisle, carrying a weathered leather suitcase. She had slipped out during the initial confrontation, rushing home to retrieve their most convincing evidence. Olivia nodded reassuringly to her daughter as she approached the stage. "These aren't just copies," she announced, her voice steady despite the hundreds of eyes fixed upon her. "We have the originals." Sullivan watched with mounting horror as Olivia opened the suitcase, carefully removing archival-quality protective sleeves containing yellowed papers, faded photographs, and official university documents. "My father saved everything," she explained, passing the materials to Professor Hirano for examination. Dr. H.E. Thompson's original research notebooks his university identification from Thompson Institute correspondence, with other linguists of his era and newspaper clippings, documenting his work. Professor Hirano carefully examined the documents, his expertise in historical linguistics, making him an ideal evaluator. The paper, ink, and writing implements appear consistent with the claimed time period, he confirmed. These would be extraordinarily difficult to falsify. He held up a particularly significant document. This letter from the American Linguistic Society acknowledges receipt of Dr. Send Thompson's manuscript on Etrurian translation methodology in 1953, a full 12 years before Professor Sullivan's first publication on the subject. Sullivan's desperate counterattack grew increasingly personal and explicitly racist. "This is absurd. Are we seriously entertaining the notion that groundbreaking linguistic scholarship originated from a professor at a small black college in the 1950s? The resources, academic rigor, and scholarly environment necessary for such work simply wouldn't have been available in such institutions." The nakedly prejudiced nature of this argument shocked even those initially skeptical of Amara's claims. Professor Reed stepped forward, her expression stern. "Professor Sullivan, I suggest you reconsider the implications of what you've just said about historically black colleges and universities. Many brilliant scholars have worked at these institutions, often precisely because racial barriers prevented their employment at predominantly white universities despite their qualifications." While Sullivan floundered, the confrontation took an unexpected turn when a young man entered the auditorium and approached the stage. Thomas Sullivan's former assistant, who had quit that morning, requested permission to speak from Dr. Wallace. "There's something relevant I need to share with this assembly," he said, his voice shaking slightly but determined. Upon receiving approval, Thomas faced the audience. 3 years ago, while assisting Professor Sullivan with research in the archives at Princeton University, we discovered an unmarked box of materials related to Etrurian language studies. Inside was an unpublished manuscript by Dr. James Thompson, submitted to a university press but never published following his death. The audience gasped as Thomas continued. Professor Sullivan spent 2 full days with that manuscript, taking extensive notes. When I asked about citing the source in his upcoming publication, he instructed me to catalog it as miscellaneous unpublished materials, without specific attribution. He said, and I quote, "These old papers are useful for background context, but contain nothing original enough to warrant specific citation." Sullivan lunged toward his former assistant. "You signed a confidentiality agreement." "This is defamation." Security personnel moved quickly to position themselves between the two men as Thomas remained steady. "I signed an agreement to protect legitimate academic work, not to become complicit in plagiarism." The evidence continued mounting as Professor Hirano, examining Dr. Thompson's notes, more thoroughly identified multiple instances where Sullivan's published translations contained the same errors found in Thompson's draft work, suggesting direct copying rather than independent development of similar methods. Most compelling, Hirano observed, is that both Sullivan's early publications and Thompson's notes contain the same misinterpretation of a particular Etrurian phrase which has since been corrected in archaeological contexts. This identical error strongly suggests direct knowledge transfer rather than parallel discovery. Dr. Wallace, recognizing the gravity of the situation, assembled an impromptu panel of senior linguistics scholars present at the symposium to evaluate the evidence. While they conferred, Sullivan made increasingly desperate attempts to discredit Amara, questioning how a 14-year-old with no formal training could possibly understand the complexities of ancient languages. "This is clearly a case of coaching," he insisted. "Someone has prepared this girl with specifically selected information designed to undermine my work for political reasons." Amara responded not with anger, but with expertise, turning to the projection screen and displaying a passage Sullivan himself had labeled permanently untranslatable in his most recent publication. "This fragment has resisted translation because you've misidentified the contextual framework," she explained calmly. "It's not a civic record as you've assumed, but rather a maritime navigation text which explains the unusual terminology." She proceeded to translate the passage fluently, explaining each component with clear methodology that built upon but also corrected aspects of her great-grandfather's approach. The audience watched in stunned silence as Amara demonstrated not just knowledge of Thompson's work, but her own original contributions to the field. Sullivan's professional unraveling accelerated as he abandoned scholarly arguments for increasingly personal and explicitly racist remarks. "This is the problem with academia today," he declared, his voice rising with frustration. "Standards are abandoned in the name of diversity. Now we're expected to believe that the cleaning lady and her daughter know more about ancient languages than scholars, with decades of dedicated study at the world's great universities." The collective intake of breath at this naked display of prejudice was audible throughout the auditorium. Even those who had initially doubted Amara's claims found themselves repulsed by Sullivan's desperate rhetoric. As Sullivan continued, his tirade, university officials in attendance began visibly distancing themselves from him, moving seats or stepping into the hallway to make urgent phone calls. What had begun as an academic dispute had transformed into a public relations nightmare, with Sullivan's mask of scholarly objectivity completely fallen away to reveal the prejudice that had always lurked beneath. News of the confrontation spread through academic circles with unprecedented speed. Within hours, video clips recorded by attendees began circulating online, showing Amara's flawless translations juxtaposed with Sullivan's increasingly unhinged responses. By evening, major educational publications had picked up the story, their headlines ranging from "Teen Linguistics Prodigy Exposes Alleged Academic Fraud" to "Historic Injustice Uncovered at Welton Symposium Black Scholars' Work Reclaimed." Sullivan retreated to his hotel room immediately following the symposium session, refusing all communication except through his attorney. The next morning he issued a carefully worded statement, claiming his work represented an original synthesis building upon multiple scholarly traditions and suggesting that superficial similarities to earlier exploratory work have been mischaracterized as intellectual appropriation. The statement further described Amara as an impressive young woman, clearly coached by individuals with political motivations aimed at undermining traditional academic hierarchies. This defensive approach backfired spectacularly. Linguistics departments worldwide began examining Sullivan's work in comparison with Dr. Thompson's recently revealed materials. Welton University announced the formation of an investigative committee, while Princeton, where Sullivan held his permanent position, issued a statement declaring unwavering commitment to academic integrity and launched a formal review of his research history. Multiple universities that had scheduled Sullivan for guest lectures and honorary degrees quietly began canceling these invitations. The symposium organizing committee, recognizing the historical significance of what had transpired, quickly restructured the remaining conference schedule to include a special session on reclaiming lost contributions. Dr. James Thompson's Etrurian translation methodology. Amara found herself suddenly thrust into a spotlight she had never sought. Reporters requested interviews, academic publishers expressed interest in her perspective, and several universities hinted at future educational opportunities. The attention overwhelmed her, accustomed as she was to intentional invisibility. "I never wanted fame," she confided to Professor Reed as they sat in a quiet corner of the campus coffee shop the day after the confrontation. "I just wanted great-grandfather to receive the recognition he deserved." Diana watched this sudden attention with mixed emotions. Pride in her daughter's brilliance and courage competed with maternal concern about exposing her to public scrutiny. "This attention won't last," she warned Amara. "But the enemies you've made might have long memories. Sullivan has powerful friends in academia." Despite these concerns, opportunities began materializing that neither mother nor daughter could have imagined days earlier. Professor Reed arranged a meeting with Dr. Wallace and the university president to discuss educational possibilities for Amara. "Your aptitude is extraordinary," the president acknowledged. "Welton would be honored to create a specialized educational track that would allow you to develop your talents appropriately." Other institutions made similar overtures, with several elite universities suggesting early admission programs with full scholarships once Amara completed necessary prerequisite education. The academic community's response to Sullivan continued deteriorating as additional evidence emerged. 3 former graduate assistants came forward with accounts of Sullivan taking credit for their work. A librarian at Cambridge revealed that Sullivan had requested and been granted exclusive access to uncatalogued linguistic materials that had subsequently disappeared from the collection. Each new revelation strengthened the case that Sullivan's celebrated career had been built substantially on appropriated work. 2 weeks after the symposium, Sullivan faced a formal academic board hearing regarding ethics violations. Though the proceedings remained confidential, his resignation from Princeton was announced shortly thereafter. His publisher placed his forthcoming book on indefinite hold pending review, and the documentary series featuring his expertise disappeared from streaming platforms. During this tumultuous period, Diana shared more of their family history with Amara. "My father, your grandfather, was also a scholar," she revealed one evening. "He taught mathematics at a community college because universities wouldn't hire him despite his doctorate from Howard. He always said education was our family's religion, passed down through generations despite every obstacle placed in our way." She paused, eyes distant with memory. "When I discovered I was pregnant with you, your father walked away, and I had to choose between completing my degree or providing for you. I chose you, always you. But I never stopped believing that someday our family's academic tradition would continue." This revelation helped Amara understand her mother's complex reactions to recent events. The pride mixed with fear, the hope tempered by hard-earned skepticism about institutions that had historically excluded people like them. As summer progressed, Amara established contact with previously unknown Thompson descendants scattered across the country. A second cousin, twice removed, who taught high school science in Chicago, sent photocopies of additional documents inherited from his branch of the family. An elderly great-aunt in Atlanta contributed family photographs showing Dr. Thompson in his university office, surrounded by the research materials that had formed the foundation of his breakthrough methodology. With Professor Reed's guidance, Amara began the painstaking process of organizing these scattered materials into a comprehensive archive. "Your great-grandfather's complete methodology needs to be properly documented and published," Reed explained. "This isn't just about correcting a historical injustice. His work contains valuable insights that could advance our understanding of ancient languages." Through all these developments, Amara maintained her focus on the scholarly substance, rather than the controversy. While media coverage often framed the situation as a dramatic downfall of a prominent academic felled by a teenage prodigy, Amara consistently redirected attention to Dr. Thompson's contributions and the broader pattern of unacknowledged work by scholars from marginalized communities. "This isn't about Professor Sullivan," she told Professor Hirano when he visited Welton to examine the Thompson archive. "It's about restoring the complete history of linguistic scholarship with all its contributors properly recognized regardless of race or background." Hirano nodded thoughtfully. "The most significant advancements often come from outside traditional power structures, from minds approaching problems without the constraints of established thinking. Your great-grandfather made breakthroughs precisely because his perspective was different, not despite it. By summer's end, the landscape had transformed dramatically. Sullivan had essentially disappeared from public view, his academic reputation in tatters. Amara had been accepted into an accelerated educational program that would allow her to complete high school requirements while taking university-level linguistics courses. Diana, inspired by recent events and supported by a special staff scholarship, enrolled in evening classes to complete the linguistics degree she had abandoned years earlier. As Amara organized the final sections of the Thompson archive in preparation for its formal presentation to the university's special collections, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. The path to reclaiming her family's legacy had been neither straight nor easy, but standing at the intersection of past injustice and future possibility, she understood that some scholarly contributions transcend individual recognition to illuminate truth that benefits all who seek knowledge. 1 year after the fateful symposium that had altered the trajectory of so many lives, Amara Jenkins walked confidently across Welton University's Central Quad, no longer an invisible visitor, but a recognized member of the academic community. At 15, she had been admitted to the university's prestigious Exceptional Scholars Program, a flexible educational pathway that allowed her to complete remaining high school requirements while simultaneously pursuing advanced linguistics studies. The autumn leaves crunched beneath her feet as she made her way toward Thompson Hall, the recently renamed linguistics building that now housed the Thompson Institute for Linguistic Studies. The establishment of this research center, dedicated to inclusive scholarship and specializing in ancient Mediterranean languages, represented the most visible institutional acknowledgement of Dr. James Thompson's rightful place in academic history. Inside the Institute's main research room, Amara found Professor Reed reviewing newly digitized manuscripts. "Perfect timing," Reed greeted her. The conservation team just finished processing that collection of Etrurian commercial documents from the Valencia archaeological site. They're ready for preliminary translation work. Amara set down her backpack, excited to examine materials that would further validate her great-grandfather's methodological approach. Over the past year, she had led a comprehensive project to restore Dr. Thompson's complete works and properly document his contributions to linguistic scholarship. This effort had expanded beyond mere historical correction to become a vibrant research initiative, generating new insights into ancient communication systems. The transformation extended beyond Amara's academic pursuits. Her mother, Diana Jenkins, had returned to university studies, balancing evening linguistics courses with her new position as administrative coordinator for the Thompson Institute. After 15 years of cleaning the university's buildings, Diana now managed budgets, coordinated visiting scholar programs, and organized international research partnerships, her natural organizational abilities finally receiving appropriate recognition and compensation. Professor Sullivan's trajectory had moved in the opposite direction. Following his resignation from Princeton, he had lost his publishing contracts, television consulting positions, and speaking engagements. His reputation, once sterling in academic circles, lay in ruins, with universities distancing themselves from his previous work and removing his books from required reading lists. His attempt to rehabilitate his image through a self-published defense had attracted little attention beyond being cataloged as a case study in academic ethics courses. The Thompson Institute had quickly established itself as a center for innovation in linguistic methodology. With funding from several major research foundations, it specialized in applying Dr. Thompson's comparative approach to previously untranslated ancient texts while simultaneously developing new techniques that built upon his foundation. In March, Amara had published her first academic paper in the Journal of Mediterranean Linguistic Studies, analyzing patterns in Etrurian commercial terminology that revealed previously unrecognized trade connections across the ancient world. The paper, co-authored with Professor Reed, had been received with enthusiasm by the scholarly community, with several prominent linguists acknowledging that a teenager had provided insights they had overlooked for decades. Sullivan had made one final attempt to discredit Amara during a regional linguistics conference in February. Appearing unexpectedly during a session where her work was being discussed, he had attempted to challenge her methodology publicly. The response had been devastating, not active hostility, but something perhaps worse, complete indifference. Senior scholars had simply continued their discussion, as if he hadn't spoken, while younger academics had openly turned their backs. After 10 uncomfortable minutes, he had departed without anyone acknowledging his exit. The afternoon sun streamed through the Institute's windows as Amara examined the newly processed Etrurian documents. Her trained eye quickly identified patterns that connected these texts to materials discovered in North African trading posts, supporting her developing thesis about extensive maritime commercial networks that had previously been underestimated by historians. "You've got that look," Diana observed, entering the research room with a stack of administrative forms. "You've found something significant, haven't you?" Amara nodded, excitement evident in her expression. "These commercial records contain terminology we've only seen in Egyptian contexts before. It suggests much more extensive direct trade than previously documented, completely changing our understanding of Mediterranean economic systems during this period." Diana smiled, recognizing the scholarly passion that connected her daughter to generations of Thompson academics. Her own return to linguistics had awakened similar enthusiasm, though her focus had developed in a different direction, specializing in pedagogical approaches to language acquisition among disadvantaged students. The Thompson family's academic renaissance extended beyond Welton's campus. In July, the Linguistic Society of America had held a special ceremony, posthumously recognizing Dr. James Thompson's contributions to the field, presenting the award to 3 generations of his descendants, who had traveled from across the country for the occasion. The Society had additionally established an annual Thompson Fellowship, supporting research by scholars from underrepresented communities. Diana had found her own place within academia, not just completing her long-deferred degree, but securing employment as the Thompson Institute's administrator, a position that valued both her organizational skills and her growing linguistic expertise. The university, recognizing the need to address systemic barriers, had established an employee educational assistance program inspired by her experience, helping service workers pursue academic advancement while maintaining financial stability. Among Amara's proudest achievements was the scholarship program she had established for underprivileged students interested in linguistics. Using a portion of the speaking fees and grant funds that had come her way, she had created opportunities for others facing barriers similar to those her family had encountered across generations. The program specifically targeted students from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in linguistic scholarship, providing not just financial support, but mentoring and research opportunities. On a warm September afternoon, Amara stood before a diverse group of middle and high school students visiting the Institute through this outreach initiative. "Language connects us across time and space," she explained, showing them an Etrurian inscription. "When we recover lost voices from the past, we often discover that people separated by centuries asked the same questions, faced similar challenges, and dreamed related dreams to our own." A 12-year-old girl with bright eyes raised her hand. "How do you know when you've got a translation right? What if you make mistakes?" Amara smiled, appreciating the insightful question. "That's exactly the right question to ask. Good scholars always question their own certainty. We verify translations through multiple methods, including comparative analysis with related languages, archaeological context and pattern consistency across multiple texts. Even then, we remain open to correction when new evidence emerges. As the session concluded, Amara showed the students her most treasured possession, a recently discovered personal letter written by Dr. James Thompson to his young children in 1953, just months before his death. In it, he had made a remarkable prediction. Though my work may go unrecognized in my lifetime, I believe that someday, perhaps through one of you, or your children, or your children's children, truth will find its voice. Knowledge belongs to no single person, but to all humanity, and what matters is not who receives credit, but that understanding advances. The letter had been discovered in an old family Bible by a distant cousin in Detroit, forwarded to Amara as the family member most actively continuing Dr. Thompson's work. As the students departed, Professor Hirano arrived for his semester as visiting scholar at the Institute. "I've reviewed your preliminary work on the pre-Etrurian inscriptions," he told Amara, as they walked toward the research library. "Your hypothesis about its connection to early Phoenician trading dialects is fascinating and well supported. You're already moving beyond your great-grandfather's work into entirely new territory." The final exhibit in the Institute's public display area featured an interactive timeline showing the development of Mediterranean language scholarship with Dr. Thompson's contributions now properly integrated. Beside it stood a small display case containing Amara's current research project fragments of an even older, previously undeciphered language that predated Etrurian by several centuries. Her preliminary analysis suggested possibilities that even Dr. Thompson had not explored, indicating that while her work had begun with reclaiming her family's legacy, her contributions would eventually create their own distinct chapter in linguistic history. Have you ever discovered an unexpected talent or passion that connected you to your family's history? How do you feel about Amara using her abilities not just for personal success, but to create opportunities for others facing similar barriers? Comment your thoughts below. If this story of hidden genius finally receiving recognition inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of extraordinary people overcoming injustice. Share this video with someone who appreciates stories about the triumph of truth over prejudice. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Amara's remarkable story. May it remind us all that brilliance exists everywhere, often where we least expect to find it. Amara's journey illustrates how brilliance can exist in unexpected places, often hidden by systemic barriers and prejudice. Her story reminds us that academic contributions from marginalized communities have frequently been erased, appropriated, or diminished throughout history. The revelation of Dr. Thompson's stolen work highlights how institutional racism has shaped whose ideas receive recognition and whose remain invisible. True intellectual progress requires acknowledging all voices regardless of background. Sullivan's downfall demonstrates that privilege and power can temporarily mask dishonesty, but cannot permanently protect those who build careers on deception. His inability to recognize Amara's genius because of his assumptions about her race and class ultimately led to his undoing. This reveals how prejudice doesn't just harm its targets, it blinds the prejudiced person to reality. Perhaps most importantly, Amara's triumph wasn't just personal vindication, but the restoration of her family's rightful legacy and the creation of opportunities for others facing similar barriers. Her establishment of scholarships and mentoring programs shows that breaking through barriers is most meaningful when it opens doors for those who follow. The Thompson Institute's success demonstrates that inclusion doesn't merely correct historical injustices, it actively advances knowledge by incorporating diverse perspectives that conventional wisdom might overlook. Excellence flourishes when we recognize that genius knows no racial, economic, or social boundaries. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated because of their background, only to prove their doubters wrong? Or perhaps you've discovered a family legacy or talent that connected you to your ancestors in unexpected ways. Share your experiences in the comments below. If you believe in the power of hidden genius and justice finally being served, hit that like button to help this story reach others who need to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories about extraordinary people overcoming prejudice and making their mark on the world. If you know someone struggling to be recognized for their talents because of discrimination, Share this video as a reminder that brilliance can't be contained forever. Thank you for joining us for Amara's incredible journey. May it inspire you to look beyond appearances and recognize the potential genius in everyone around you.